Misaligned points. The engines on the island of Sodor are good at moving its signals. They can either pass with freight cars or coaches. Thomas likes him because he is a smart little tank engine. But his two faithful coaches are Emily and Eric. One fine afternoon, James arrived in the rail yard with a train of gondola cars. Sir Topham Hatt had a job for Thomas. I would like you to do a new job by delivering frozen treats to Vickerstown, he said. It's a really long journey, but you must stay focused at night, he said. Thomas laughed. I love frozen treats, he said. Make sure to go nice and carefully, said Sir Topham Hatt. I will, sir, said Thomas. James looked. He was overjoyed. Do you think a red engine can be a frozen treat? He laughed, 'cause that would be yummy. Thomas thought it was funny. A few minutes later, Fatu arrived in the yard with a long, heavy train full of ballast and sleepers. She was taking it to Harwick. Thomas was in the yard. He was waiting for his train. Where are you taking all those? Asked Thomas. They're rail sleepers, said Fatu. They're used for laying down rails. As soon as Thomas's freight cars were brought to the yard, he buffered up and he steamed away.
Dun, dun, dun.
The freight cars were filled with lots of frozen treats and candy, and it was really long, with the 7 cars behind it. Good luck on your journey, called Fatu. And make sure to go nice and carefully. Thomas heard Fatu. Thanks, Fatu, he said, and he puffed off. When the sun went down after dark, Thomas steamed through the night with his train of candy and frozen treats. His lamp was shining bright, and it was a nice night to go nicely along. Further up down the line, Beanish was waiting at a signal. She was a little suspicious. The points ahead aren't aligned properly, she said. It would cause an accident for me. Then her driver got out of the cab to avoid being hit by debris and falling rail equipment when Thomas entered the siding. Thomas's driver applied the brakes, and Beanish braced herself while her crew members jumped to safety, and Thomas skidded along the rails, and then it was too late. Early the next morning, the sun was shining and the birds were singing. And everyone was enjoying the nice weather, and the birds were all different colors, and The blue jays were flying and eating seed at the bird feeder with their beautiful feathers. Hadley arrived at Thomas's accident to see if he was all right with the breakdown train. She came to a stop right in front of the crash. "Are you all right?" asked Hadley. "Of course I am," said Thomas. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was just a big crash. A few minutes later, Percy shoved the freight cars back onto the line and into place. And Hadley took Beanish's train off to Treatsfield. It was a really long train, but Hadley thrived while she pulled the load as much as she could, and she was being really useful with all the items behind her. And the train had lots of cars, and the last car was the brake van. A few minutes later, Nairi arrived at Thomas's rescue. Percy pulled up too. "I'm sure you're gonna be fine, Thomas," Percy said. "Yes, Percy, I will be fine," he said. "I'm just covered in melted Dippin' Dots." Beanish's buffers and funnel were sheared off. Percy shunted the freight cars out of the way, and Nairi helped Thomas to safety. And he was on the rails again. Nairi heaved and she puffed. "I must get Thomas delivered to the steamworks," she said. A few minutes later, Nairi started to move. Thomas was heavy, but Nairi pressed on. "You're gonna be really useful," Nairi said. Before long, Thomas was repaired and he was shunting freight cars again. They were heavy. "I'm back at work," said Thomas. "I'm glad you are," said Beanish. A few minutes later, Thomas and Beanish were at Killabin Station. Sir Topham had arrived. "I would like you to do the frozen treat run today, Thomas," Sir Topham had said. "Yes, sir," said Thomas. And he backed into the freight cars, and he puffed away. The freight cars of 7 wagons were heavy. But Thomas pressed on. It was a really long train. That night, Liz was at a signal, and this time the points were aligned in the right position. It's kind of me to wait for Thomas," Liz said. "He's just gonna pass me so I can continue on my way." and Thomas came puffing really fast by. His train was really long, and Liz watched him pass. Thomas was doing a fine job overnight, and his delivery was very important. When the sun came up the next morning, Thomas arrived in Vickerstown. He was doing a good job with his train. And he puffed off into the rail yard. Thomas brought the freight cars to a complete stop. Stop. And Brussie was coupled up to the freight cars, and she brought them to the maintenance facility to be washed. Thomas was very proud